Hi and welcome back to LDF Designs. In today's video I'm going to take these wood rounds that someone gave to me and finish them out. I started by painting one side with some chalk paint, and now I'm going to use this joint compound and create some different texture and apply some plaster cloth and metal pieces to the joint compound, and then once that all dries it sets permanently and makes a really great surface to work on. I had these two little metal round pieces that they basically are I think something from an old necklace, but they had little prongs on the back that were kind of sharp, and I thought maybe I could set those down into the mixture, but it just wasn't grasping a hold of them as well as I expected. So I went ahead and popped them through a little piece of fabric, and then I will go ahead and stick that onto a little pile of the joint compound, and it worked out quite nicely. Once they dried, it really secured those pieces into the undersurface of the whole piece of art. They were definitely a little fiddly to get set and make sure I didn't have too much compound on the top of the surface. But once I got them in there and got them set, they worked out really well. And you can see what I did with the finished piece on this one over on my Instagram page. That particular round I don't end up completing on this video. The video just got a little too long. So, but I did some pretty cool things with those, and you can see that over on my Instagram page, which is www.instagram.com/LDF-Designs-Art. In keeping with my theme as of lately, I am using fabric, metal pieces, the drywall compound, and the plaster cloth, which I did mention a little earlier, but just doing them in a little bit different way on these rounds, I thought that they might make a nice centerpiece for a table, or something that you would just set out maybe up on a shelf for a conversation piece. If you have enough of the compound down on your surface, a lot of times you can just take a thin fabric and push it on there and it will stay. But sometimes I do like to put a little bit on the back of the fabric so that you have a drywall compound or a plaster to plaster bond. Usually those stick pretty well. I also had in my stash this little piece of metal. I don't even know what it was. I think it must have had other things attached to it at some point that you were able to snap off, but it was a really interesting design, and so that one I did just kind of put it down into the compound to see if it would hold it without any other material or plaster cloth to help it stay in place, and it worked. Oftentimes as I'm putting the little pieces on there, I don't always get enough plaster on the cloth in between the nails or the small pieces of metal. So I'll pull some out of the box there that has fallen off of the plaster cloth. I kind of just sprinkle some of that into the area I need it, add a little water to it, and make sure that it activates. And that usually does the trick to secure my metal pieces. I recently purchased some paper straws, and I have been starting to find ways to put those onto the pieces as well. They're kind of nice because they also create a conduit, so if I wanted to run something through that was then through the plaster, and still have some mobility to it, they work out nicely for that. It is important if you try this technique to make sure that you get your pieces set exactly where you want them, because once this starts to dry, and it does start to dry pretty quickly, those pieces are set, and unless you take a hammer or chisel or some sandpaper, they're not going to move on you. So if you are trying this for the first time, just make sure that you have the things put in place exactly where you're wanting them, or at least fairly close. Once I got everything set into place on these, I did go ahead and let them dry completely. Usually overnight is just about enough, unless you have some really thick areas of the plaster or joint compound. But in these cases I did leave these set for a few days because I had some other things I was working on. But here in a moment we'll go ahead and get started with applying the encaustic. So here they are all dried, and I got out some pigment powder and some tar. I'm going to be using this cerulean gray encaustic paint by R&F, and also some clear and white encaustic paints, and just going to go ahead and get started to build these layers. Normally when you get ready to start a piece, you do want to warm up the surface. I started to do that and then remembered that I had wanted to put some charcoal and graphite lines onto these before I started those, so that's what I'm doing here. It is important to note that the graphite and charcoal, when you start applying the encaustic, sometimes it will move around on you a little bit in the warm encaustic. If you're not wanting that to happen, sometimes you can use a little bit of fixative or if you kind of tap the encaustic on it as opposed to dragging the brush across it, sometimes that will also help it remain in place. I'm not typically too concerned in my pieces when that happens. In this case, I did go ahead and smear the charcoal around a little bit before I started applying the encaustic. As you can see, when the encaustic starts to absorb into these materials, they do change in tone, and it's one of the things that I actually love about these products. I love all of the neutral tones that you can create with them. One of the things that's hard to capture on my videos is the different timing of how often the piece needs to sit and cool. A lot of artists like to work on multiple pieces at the same time, and there are some benefits to that where you can let some of the pieces cool while you're working on other ones and move them back and forth. Sometimes I don't find that as easy for myself, just in how I work. I end up focusing in on one piece. But in this case, I was trying really hard to stretch myself a little bit and work on multiple pieces simultaneously. So I was letting those pieces cool so that I could come back and do some incising and texture work on them. While they were cooling, I went ahead and put some more base layers on these other pieces. It is definitely something that takes a lot of practice working multiple pieces simultaneously. For myself, in my own practice, I often find it a little more stressful than relaxing, so I don't do it very often. I've said before, but we'll show you again here, that oftentimes in these highly textured pieces, I have a tendency to do what a lot of encaustic artists would call it overfuse on these early layers. I put the encaustic on and I basically heat it to re-liquefy it and make sure that it absorbs down into all of these different textures. I don't know if it's really a required thing, it's just the way that I like to put my piece together. It makes me feel a little more confident when I know that that encaustic has absorbed in there and created a good surface for the next several layers to bond onto. At this point, I went ahead and pulled the cooled pieces back to the front of the table. I have several stencils, and so I grabbed one and started to incise the design using a little tool and just tracing that stencil pattern into the encaustic. And then I'm going to use some different products to go ahead and pull those marks to the front. I also decided to add a little more texture with the encaustic, so just going ahead and building up some texture on some areas of these with the encaustic. This is a little bit of roof tar or roof pitch that I have blended up with some vegetable oil and just pushing that into the different areas that I just created. It is possible to recreate some browns in different colors with oil paints and pastels, but there's something about the different nuances of the color of the tar, the kind of honey and brown, and sometimes it can even look a little black. And to get all of the different tones together, it is a little bit difficult to recreate it with paint. A raw umber or a burnt umber can come pretty close, but the actual colors that the tar creates is pretty neat and hard to emulate. I usually make my own encaustic and my own white encaustic, and I had run out recently and tried to make a little bit more, and I must not have gotten my ratio quite right. And so this particular white paint, as soon as the heat hits it, it wants to really spread out, and doesn't always behave the way that I want it to. So I did struggle a little bit, wanted some white on there, but was struggling a little bit with how it was spreading out. I created a little more texture and was wanting to push the white back a little bit, so I tried something a little different. I used the black pigment powder, mixed that up with a little bit of vegetable oil to see how it would behave on the piece. It didn't do quite exactly maybe what I expected, and it was definitely a lot darker than what I had intended. But I went ahead, I had already applied it. I could have scraped all of this back off, but decided to just keep working with it instead. But I didn't really go back to that on these pieces. It did work, and I could see potentially using it maybe in the future on a different kind of piece, but it was just a little too stark of a contrast for the little surface area that I was working with. At least that was my artist eye opinion with what I was trying to create on these little wood rounds. I just wasn't satisfied with where that one was going, and no matter how many times I set it aside, I just kept pulling it back over and adding more texture to it. I'm not sure what it was I was trying to work towards, but decided that the black was too much and went back to the tar to see if I could cover up some of the black. I do like to put circles in my work, and oftentimes I'll take a plastic straw and make marks, circles obviously, into the encaustic, and then again use some kind of different material to pull those circles out. So in this case, I went ahead and made a whole bunch of circles with my plastic straw, filled that in with the tar mixture, and now I'm just cleaning that off. This is a Dr. P.H. Martin's ink. It's a metallic ink, and I have started using it a little bit recently and starting to discover just some different things I can do with it that I really love. So in this case, I started off just going ahead and putting a little bit onto the surface. Once it dries its set, you don't necessarily have to fuse it. In some cases I fuse it, and in some cases I don't. Generally I do not fuse it though when it's wet. You do let it dry first. So these pieces are just about done, and I'm going to go ahead and start working on the other two. And the fifth piece, like I said earlier, I don't end up showing you how I complete that, but I do have pictures of all of these over on my Instagram. You can see some more close-up shots over there if you want to see how they finish out. So these next couple of minutes I'm just going to go ahead and do some work on two of the other pieces and do some different things to them to create some different points of interest. Here I'm creating some drips or some runs. If you take the edge of your brush and kind of push it onto the edge of your substrate, it will cause the wax to run down the piece, and oftentimes I like to then go ahead and incise the outside of that and fill that back in with a dark contrasting color. It creates kind of neat effect. I had put some white splashes on there, but again, as soon as the heat hit that, the white just spread out, and that was not what I wanted to have happen. So I ended up going back and scraping a lot of that back off and decided to do something a little different. I went ahead and added another little piece of fabric to this particular round, and I just dipped the top part of it into the encaustic to try to leave some of the fabric dry, and that's an effect also that I do like to put in some of my work. That just about wraps this video up, and I hope that you'll go over and check these out on the Instagram page, and I will see you the next time. Thank you for joining me.